Janet Pierce sat in her small wooden workshop, watching the morning sunlight stream through the dusty windows. The smell of fresh sawdust filled the air. Her hands, now marked with the lines of 66 years, moved carefully over a piece of pine wood. She was sanding it smooth, preparing it for her next class. It was hard to believe that 25 years had passed since she first arrived in Copper Valley, Montana. Back then, she had been 41 years old, running away from a life that had broken her heart. Now, at 66, she had built something new, something quiet, something safe. But the past never truly leaves us. Janet knew this better than anyone. Her story began long before Copper Valley. It began in Quantico, Virginia, at the FBI Academy, where she had trained to become one of the country's leading criminal psychologists. Fresh out of graduate school with a doctorate in psychology, Janet had been recruited by the FBI when she was only 26 years old. She was brilliant, determined, and passionate about understanding the criminal mind. For 15 years, she worked in the Behavioral Analysis Unit. She interviewed serial criminals, analyzed crime scenes, and helped police departments across the country solve their most difficult cases. Her colleagues called her the mind reader because she could look at a crime scene and tell them what kind of person they were looking for. She could sit across from a suspect and see through their lies. Janet traveled constantly. She worked 80-hour weeks. She rarely slept. But she loved her job. She felt like she was making a difference, protecting innocent people and bringing justice to those who deserved it. Then came the case that changed everything. It was a cold February morning in 2000. Janet was 41 years old. She had been called to assist the Denver Police Department with a series of robberies. The suspect, a man named David Brennan, had been caught and brought in for questioning. He was 35 years old, unemployed, and desperate. He had robbed 3 convenience stores in 2 weeks. Janet sat down across from David in the interrogation room. She had interviewed hundreds of suspects before. She knew how to ask questions, how to build rapport, how to find the truth. But something about David was different. He seemed scared, confused, and deeply troubled. "David," Janet said softly, "I'm here to help you. Tell me what happened." David looked at her with tears in his eyes. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," he whispered. "I just needed money. My daughter is sick. My wife left me. I lost everything." Janet felt sympathy for him, but she also knew he had committed crimes. People could have been hurt. She needed to understand his state of mind, his intentions, his level of danger to society. "I understand you're in a difficult situation," Janet said, "but you need to take responsibility for your actions. Tell me the truth, and we can work through this together." David nodded. He began to talk. He told her about his failures, his fears, his desperation. Janet listened carefully, taking notes. She asked gentle questions. She tried to understand him. But then something went terribly wrong. David suddenly stood up. His expression changed. The fear turned into something else. Hopelessness, despair, resignation. Before Janet could react, before the officers outside could respond, David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small razor blade he had somehow hidden from the search. "I'm sorry," he said. "I can't do this anymore." And then, in front of Janet's eyes, David cut his own throat. The room erupted into chaos. Officers rushed in. Medical personnel arrived. Janet sat frozen in her chair, covered in blood, unable to move, unable to speak. She watched as they tried to save David's life. She watched as he died on the floor of the interrogation room. The investigation that followed cleared Janet of any wrongdoing. The security search had failed to find the razor blade. David had hidden it carefully. There was nothing Janet could have done differently. But Janet didn't care about the official findings. She blamed herself. Night after night, she relived those final moments. She analyzed every word she had said, every question she had asked. Had she pushed him too hard? Had she missed the signs? Could she have prevented his death? The nightmares began. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. She couldn't work. Her colleagues tried to help her, but Janet withdrew into herself. The job she had once loved now felt like a source of pain. Every time she sat across from a suspect, she saw David's face. 6 months after David's death, Janet submitted her resignation to the FBI. Her supervisors tried to convince her to stay. They offered her counseling, time off, a different position. But Janet's mind was made up. She needed to get away from criminal psychology, away from interrogation rooms, away from the darkness she had spent 15 years studying. "I need a fresh start," she told her supervisor on her last day. "I need to find something different, something that doesn't involve analyzing the worst parts of human nature." Her supervisor, a kind man named Robert Chen, nodded sadly. "You were one of our best, Janet, but I understand. Take care of yourself. And remember, what happened wasn't your fault." Janet thanked him, but deep down, she didn't believe him. Part 2. Arrival in Copper Valley. Janet spent the next month driving across America with no clear destination in mind. She had sold her apartment in Virginia, packed her belongings into her old Ford pickup truck, and headed west. She didn't have a plan. She just knew she needed to find somewhere quiet, somewhere far away from the life she had known. She drove through small towns and rural areas, looking for a place that felt right. She passed through Kentucky, Illinois, Nebraska, and Wyoming. Nothing spoke to her. Everything felt either too big, too busy, or too empty. Then, in late October 2000, she found herself driving through western Montana. The autumn leaves were changing colors, painting the landscape in shades of gold, orange, and red. The air was crisp and clean. The mountains rose majestically in the distance. And then she saw the sign, Copper Valley, population 3,200, welcome home. Something about that sign made Janet slow down. Welcome home. It was such a simple phrase, but it touched something deep inside her. She took the exit and drove into the small town. Copper Valley was nestled in a valley between two mountain ranges. Main Street had a few dozen businesses: a grocery store, a hardware store, a diner, a post office, a library, and a couple of churches. The buildings were old but well maintained. People walked along the sidewalks, greeting each other by name. Children played in small parks. Everything moved at a gentle, unhurried pace. Janet parked her truck in front of a diner called Betty's Home Cooking. She went inside and ordered coffee and a sandwich. The owner, a cheerful woman in her 50s, introduced herself as Betty Wilson. "You're not from around here," Betty said with a friendly smile. "Just passing through?" "I'm not sure yet," Janet replied honestly. "I'm looking for a place to settle down. Somewhere quiet." Betty's eyes lit up. "Well, you've come to the right place. Copper Valley is the quietest town in Montana. We don't get much excitement here, and that's just how we like it. Are you retired?" Janet hesitated. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't want to explain her past. "I'm starting over," she said carefully. "I had a career that didn't work out. I'm looking for something simpler now." Betty nodded sympathetically. "Lots of people come here for a fresh start. This valley has a way of healing people. What kind of work are you looking for?" "I'm not sure," Janet admitted. "I need something calm. Something where I can work with my hands, maybe. I've always been good at building things." "Funny you should mention that," Betty said. "The regional detention center just outside town is looking for a woodworking instructor. They teach skills to people who are getting released from prison, help them prepare for life on the outside. The last instructor retired 3 months ago, and they haven't found a replacement yet." Janet's first instinct was to say no. The last thing she wanted was to work with criminals again. But then she reconsidered. Teaching woodworking was completely different from psychological profiling. It was hands-on, practical, and focused on building things rather than analyzing dark motivations. And these would be people who had served their time and were trying to start over, just like her. That might be interesting, Janet said slowly. Do you know who I should talk to? Betty wrote down a name and phone number. Contact Martin Hayes. He's the program director. He's a good man. Tell him Betty sent you. Janet spent that afternoon walking around Copper Valley. She visited the library, strolled through a small park, and looked at houses for rent. The town felt peaceful. The people seemed genuine. There was no pretense here, no crime scene tape, no darkness lurking around corners. It was exactly what she needed. 2 days later, Janet had an interview with Martin Hayes at the Regional Detention Center. The center was located 5 miles outside of town. It was a medium security facility that housed about 400 inmates. Martin explained that the center had a strong focus on rehabilitation. They offered educational programs, vocational training, and counseling services to help inmates prepare for release. Our woodworking program has been very successful, Martin said. Many of our graduates find jobs in construction, furniture making, or carpentry when they get out. We need someone who can teach basic and intermediate woodworking skills. Do you have experience with this? Janet explained that she had always enjoyed woodworking as a hobby. Her father had been a carpenter, and he had taught her when she was young. She had built furniture, fixed things around her house, and found peace in working with wood. She didn't mention her FBI background. She presented herself simply as someone who wanted a quiet job where she could help others. Martin was impressed. You seem like a good fit. The job doesn't pay much, but it's meaningful work. These men and women need people who believe in them, who can teach them practical skills and help them see a path forward. Are you comfortable working with people who have criminal records? Janet thought about this carefully. Everyone deserves a second chance, she said. If they've served their time and want to change, I'd be honored to help them. Martin smiled. When can you start? Part 3. Building a New Life. Janet rented a small house on Elm Street, just 3 blocks from Main Street. It was a modest single-story home with 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a small backyard. The previous owner had left behind some furniture. Janet added her own belongings and slowly made the place feel like home. She started her job at the detention center in November 2000. The woodworking workshop was a large room filled with workbenches, tools, and raw materials. Safety was the top priority. All tools were carefully controlled and counted. Janet would teach classes of 6 to 8 students at a time. Each class lasted 8 weeks. Her first group of students was wary. They didn't trust easily, and they had every reason to be skeptical of another person in authority. But Janet approached them differently than they expected. She didn't ask about their crimes. She didn't lecture them about right and wrong. She simply taught them how to work with wood. Woodworking requires patience, she told them on the first day. You can't rush it. If you try to force the wood, it will split or break. You have to respect the material, understand its grain, work with its natural properties. The same is true in life. She showed them how to measure accurately, how to cut straight lines, how to sand smoothly, and how to join pieces together. She taught them about different types of wood and their uses. She demonstrated techniques for making simple furniture, benches, tables, shelves, and boxes. But Janet did more than just teach woodworking. She talked to her students. She learned their names, their stories, and their hopes. She asked about their families, their plans after release, and their fears about returning to society. She offered encouragement without judgment. She listened without trying to analyze or psychologically profile them. One of her early students, a man named Carlos, told her, "You're different from the other teachers here. You actually care about us as people, not just as inmates." Janet smiled. "You are people. That's all I see." Over the weeks and months, Janet's reputation grew within the detention center. Inmates requested to be in her classes. They worked hard and took pride in their projects. The recidivism rate for her students was lower than average, meaning fewer of them returned to crime after release. Martin Hayes was thrilled with her success. Meanwhile, Janet settled into life in Copper Valley. She became a regular at Betty's Diner, always ordering the same breakfast on Saturday mornings: scrambled eggs, whole wheat toast, and black coffee. She joined the local library and devoured books on woodworking, gardening, and local history. She attended services at the small Episcopal church on Sundays, sitting quietly in the back pew. The people of Copper Valley gradually got to know her. They knew her as Janet Pierce, the woodworking teacher. They knew she was quiet, kind, and private. They didn't pry into her past, respecting her obvious desire for privacy. Some people speculated that she was running from a bad marriage or a family tragedy, but no one asked directly. Janet made a few close friends. There was Betty Wilson from the diner, who became like a sister to her. There was Margaret Chen, the librarian, who shared Janet's love of books. And there was Tom Brenner, the owner of the hardware store, who always gave Janet advice on tools and materials for her classes. "You've got good hands, Janet," Tom told her once. "Natural carpenter's hands. Your students are lucky to have you." But Janet never forgot why she had come to Copper Valley. She never forgot David Brennan's face, his desperate eyes, his final moments. Late at night, alone in her house, she still sometimes woke from nightmares, sweating and shaking. The trauma didn't disappear just because she had changed locations and careers. However, working with wood helped, creating things helped, teaching people who wanted to change their lives helped. Slowly, year by year, Janet began to heal. Part 4. 25 years in Copper Valley. The years passed peacefully. Janet turned 50, then 55, then 60. Her hair, once dark brown, gradually turned silver gray. Her hands developed calluses and scars from decades of woodworking. She moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned patience the hard way. Copper Valley changed little during those 25 years. A few businesses came and went on Main Street. Some families moved away, and new ones moved in. But the essential character of the town remained the same: quiet, friendly, and unhurried. Janet's students numbered in the hundreds over those years. She taught young men who had made mistakes in their youth. She taught older men who had spent decades in prison and were finally getting a second chance. She taught a few women, too, as the detention center's population diversified. Each student was different, but Janet treated them all with the same respect and care. She never told anyone about her FBI background. As far as the people of Copper Valley knew, Janet had always been a woodworking teacher. Her past remained a secret she kept locked away. But old habits die hard. Even though Janet was no longer a criminal psychologist, she couldn't turn off her trained ability to read people. She noticed things others missed: slight changes in behavior, inconsistencies in stories, hidden emotions beneath surface expressions. She observed these things quietly and kept her insights to herself. Over the years, Janet did notice some concerning patterns among a few of her students. Sometimes she could tell when someone wasn't genuinely committed to change. She could see when someone was just going through the motions, waiting to return to their old lifestyle. When she spotted these red flags, she would quietly mention her concerns to Martin Hayes, who would arrange for additional counseling or supervision. "You have good instincts," Martin told her more than once. "You can read people better than anyone I've ever met." Have you ever considered becoming a counselor? Janet always declined. I'm happy teaching woodworking. That's all I want to do. By 2024, Janet was 66 years old. She had been teaching at the detention center for nearly 25 years. She was an institution in Copper Valley, as much a part of the town as the mountains that surrounded it. Young people who had grown up there remembered her as the nice lady who always smiled and said hello. Older residents considered her a pillar of the community. She lived simply. Her house was paid off. She had modest savings. She took pleasure in small things: morning walks, good books, Saturday farmers markets, Sunday church services, and dinner with friends. She had built a good life, a quiet life, a life far removed from the trauma of her past. But that past was about to catch up with her in an unexpected way. Part 5. Marcus Dalton. In January 2024, a new student joined Janet's woodworking class. His name was Marcus Dalton. He was 34 years old, tall and thin, with short, dark hair and pale blue eyes. According to his file, he had been convicted of aggravated assault 10 years earlier and had just been released after serving his full sentence. Janet greeted him the same way she greeted all new students, with a warm smile and a handshake. Welcome, Marcus. I'm Janet Pierce. I'll be your instructor for the next 8 weeks. Have you ever done any woodworking before? No, ma'am, Marcus replied quietly. His voice was soft, almost timid. I'm interested in learning, though. I want to get a job in construction when I finish this program. That's a good goal, Janet said. I'll teach you everything you need to know to get started. We'll begin with safety procedures and basic tools. During the first 2 weeks of class, Marcus seemed like a model student. He arrived on time, listened carefully to instructions, and worked diligently on his projects. He was quiet and kept to himself, but that wasn't unusual. Many of Janet's students were introverted, especially at first. However, as the weeks progressed, Janet began to notice small things about Marcus that didn't quite add up. These were subtle observations that most people wouldn't catch, but Janet's trained eye missed nothing. First, there was his behavior on certain days. Most students were consistent in their mood and demeanor. They might have good days and bad days, but there was a predictable pattern. Marcus, however, showed strange variations. On Tuesdays and Fridays, he seemed distracted and tense. His hands would shake slightly when he held tools. He would check the clock frequently. But on other days, he was calm and focused. Second, there were his questions. Marcus asked the normal questions about woodworking techniques and tool usage, but he also asked unusual questions that seemed unrelated to carpentry. How many people usually attend the Saturday farmers market downtown? He asked once. Another time. What time does the market open? What time is it busiest? Janet found these questions odd. Most students didn't care about the farmers market. They were focused on learning skills that would help them find employment. Why was Marcus interested in crowd patterns at a local market? Third, there was his phone usage. Students were allowed to keep their phones in the workshop, but were asked to use them only during breaks. Marcus followed this rule, but Janet noticed that during breaks, he would step outside and make calls. She could see him through the window, pacing back and forth, speaking intensely into his phone. His body language suggested stress and agitation. Fourth, there was an incident with his car. One day, Janet walked past the parking lot and saw Marcus sitting in his vehicle. The car door was open, and she could see papers spread across his passenger seat. From a distance, she couldn't read the papers clearly, but she glimpsed what looked like a hand-drawn map or diagram. When Marcus noticed her approaching, he quickly gathered the papers and stuffed them into his glove compartment. "Everything okay?" Janet asked casually. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied too quickly. "Just organizing some paperwork." Janet smiled and continued to her own car, but her mind was working. Something felt wrong. Her old instincts, dormant for 25 years, were beginning to wake up. Part 6. The investigation begins. Janet told herself she was being paranoid. After all, she had spent a quarter century trying to escape her past as a criminal psychologist. She had no business analyzing her students' behavior beyond what was necessary for teaching. Marcus was probably just an anxious person adjusting to life outside prison. The strange questions and odd behavior could have innocent explanations, but she couldn't shake her unease. Night after night, she found herself thinking about Marcus. She remembered her training from the FBI. She remembered the behavioral patterns that indicated someone was planning something. And Marcus was exhibiting several of those patterns. Heightened anxiety on specific days, reconnaissance-style questions about public gatherings, secretive behavior, and hidden documents. "Stop it," she told herself firmly. "You're retired. This isn't your job anymore." But what if Marcus was planning something dangerous? What if her intuition was correct? If she ignored her concerns and something bad happened, she would never forgive herself. She had failed David Brennan by not preventing his suicide. She couldn't fail again. Janet made a decision. She would quietly observe Marcus more carefully, just to either confirm or dispel her concerns. If she found evidence of something truly worrying, she would report it to Martin Hayes. If her suspicions proved unfounded, she would let it go and return to her peaceful life. She began to pay closer attention to Marcus during class. She listened when he talked to other students. She noticed who he associated with and what he discussed. Most of the conversations were mundane: sports, TV shows, food. But occasionally, Marcus would mention the downtown area, the farmers market, or upcoming community events. One day, another student, a young man named Derek, mentioned that he was planning to take his daughter to the farmers market on Saturday. "It's her favorite thing," Derek said happily. "She loves the fresh strawberries." Marcus's reaction was subtle but noticeable to Janet. His jaw tensed. His hands gripped his tools more tightly. He stared at Derek for a moment with an expression Janet couldn't quite interpret. Concern? Fear? Anger? "That's nice," Marcus said flatly, then turned back to his work. That evening, Janet drove to the public library. She logged onto one of the public computers and searched for information about Marcus Dalton. She felt guilty doing this. It felt like a violation of his privacy. But her gut told her something was wrong. Public records showed Marcus's criminal history. 10 years ago, he had been convicted of aggravated assault. According to news articles from that time, Marcus had attacked a man outside a bar in Billings, Montana. The victim had suffered serious injuries, but had survived. Marcus had shown no remorse during his trial and had received the maximum sentence. Janet read the psychological evaluations from his court case. The psychologist had noted that Marcus exhibited antisocial tendencies, poor impulse control, and limited capacity for empathy. The report recommended extensive counseling and mental health treatment during incarceration. But had Marcus received that treatment? Janet couldn't find records indicating he had. Instead, it appeared he had spent 10 years in prison without significant rehabilitation efforts. He had been released because his sentence was complete, not because he had been deemed reformed. Janet's concern deepened. People with untreated antisocial tendencies often struggled to reintegrate into society. They might appear to be doing well on the surface, but could be planning harmful actions. The fact that Marcus was asking questions about public gatherings was particularly troubling. Over the next 2 weeks, Janet became a detective again. She hated herself for it, but she couldn't stop. Every fiber of her being told her that Marcus was planning something. She started documenting everything. She kept a private notebook where she recorded Marcus's behavior, questions, and any unusual incidents. She noted the days when he seemed most agitated, Tuesdays and Fridays. She wrote down the questions he asked about the farmer's market. She described his secretive phone calls and his reaction when Derek mentioned taking his daughter to the market. She also began her own surveillance. On her days off, she would drive downtown and observe the Saturday farmer's market. It was held every Saturday from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. in the town square. The market was popular, attracting between 200 and 300 people each week. Vendors sold fresh produce, baked goods, handmade crafts, and flowers. Families came with children. Elderly couples walked hand in hand. It was one of Copper Valley's most beloved community events. As Janet watched the crowds, her mind ran through scenarios. If someone wanted to hurt a lot of people in Copper Valley, the Saturday market would be the ideal target. It was predictable, crowded, and full of vulnerable people, families, children, seniors. But what would Marcus's method be? He couldn't bring weapons into the detention center, but he would have access to tools and materials once his classes ended in 2 weeks. He could potentially build something dangerous if he had the knowledge. Janet's next step was to review Marcus's classwork more carefully. She examined the projects he had completed. Most were standard beginner pieces: a simple shelf, a small box, a cutting board. But she noticed something interesting. Marcus had asked for extra materials to practice at home. He had requested specific types of wood, metal brackets, and particular tools. Janet felt a chill run down her spine. The items Marcus requested could be used to build furniture, but they could also be used to construct something else: a container, a device, something portable. She knew she was making leaps in logic. She knew she might be completely wrong. But she also knew that in her 15 years at the FBI, her instincts had rarely been wrong. On a Wednesday evening, Janet made a difficult phone call. She called Tom Brenner at the hardware store. "Tom, this is Janet. I have a strange question. Has anyone come into your store recently asking about unusual combinations of materials? Maybe someone looking for timers, batteries, or other electronic components along with hardware supplies?" Tom was quiet for a moment. "That's a very specific question, Janet. Why are you asking?" Janet hesitated. She didn't want to alarm anyone without cause. "I might be working on a project and need to know what's available locally." "Well," Tom said slowly, "now that you mention it, there was a man in here last week. Younger guy, 30s maybe. He bought some wire, a digital timer, batteries, and some metal brackets. I remember because it was an odd combination. He said he was building an automated irrigation system for his garden." Janet's heart rate increased. "What day was this?" "Friday afternoon. Why?" "Can you describe him?" Tom described a man who matched Marcus's appearance perfectly. Janet thanked Tom and hung up. Her hands were shaking. Marcus was acquiring materials that could have legitimate uses but could also be used for something far more sinister. She had to face the possibility that Marcus Dalton was planning an attack on the Saturday farmers market. That night, Janet barely slept. She paced her small house, wrestling with what to do. She had no concrete proof of Marcus's intentions. Everything she had was circumstantial: behavioral observations, suspicious questions, and purchased materials that could have innocent purposes. If she went to the authorities with such thin evidence, they might dismiss her as a paranoid old woman. But if she said nothing and something terrible happened, how could she live with herself? At 3 a.m., Janet made her decision. She would do what she should have done from the beginning: use her professional training to assess the situation properly and present her findings to the appropriate authorities. She would approach this methodically, building a comprehensive case based on behavioral analysis, just as she had done during her FBI career. She spent Thursday compiling all her observations into a detailed report. She organized the information chronologically, noting dates, times, and specific behaviors. She included 1. Marcus's psychological evaluation from 10 years ago showing antisocial tendencies. 2. His lack of rehabilitation during his prison sentence. 3. His unusual interest in the Saturday farmers market. 4. His agitated behavior on specific days. 5. His secretive phone calls. 6. The papers she glimpsed in his car. 7. His reaction when Derek mentioned the market. 8. The materials he purchased from the hardware store. 9. The timing. His class would end on Friday, giving him Saturday free. When she finished the report, Janet read it over. It was compelling, but she knew it might not be enough. Law enforcement agencies received countless tips about suspicious behavior, and most turned out to be nothing. She needed to make her credentials clear. That meant revealing her past. Janet sat at her kitchen table, staring at the phone. For 25 years, she had kept her FBI background secret. Revealing it now would change everything. People in Copper Valley would see her differently. They would ask questions. Her peaceful, anonymous life would be over. But lives might be at stake. Her personal comfort didn't matter. On Friday morning, Janet called the detention center and told Martin Hayes she needed to meet with him immediately. She sounded serious enough that Martin cleared his schedule. An hour later, Janet sat in Martin's office. She handed him her report and then dropped the bombshell. Before I became a woodworking teacher, I spent 15 years as a criminal psychologist with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. I specialized in analyzing criminal behavior patterns and threat assessment. I came to Copper Valley to escape that life, and I've kept this secret for 25 years. But now I believe one of my students, Marcus Dalton, is planning to carry out an attack on the Saturday farmers market tomorrow. I need you to take this seriously. Martin stared at her in shock. You were with the FBI? Yes. I know this is a lot to process, but please read my report. I've documented everything. My professional assessment is that Marcus Dalton poses an imminent threat to public safety. Martin read the report carefully. His expression grew increasingly concerned. When he finished, he looked up at Janet. This is detailed, professional. If what you're saying about your background is true, then this is credible. But Janet, why didn't you ever mention your FBI experience? You've been here for 25 years. I was running from trauma, Janet said quietly. I witnessed something terrible during an interrogation, and I couldn't continue in that field. I needed a complete break from criminal psychology. Teaching woodworking gave me that. But now I can't ignore what my training is telling me. Marcus is planning something, and it's going to happen tomorrow. Martin nodded slowly. I believe you. We need to call the police immediately. Actually, given the potential seriousness of this, we should contact the FBI as well. That's what I was hoping you'd say, Janet replied. Within 2 hours, Janet found herself in the sheriff's office, sitting across from Sheriff David Carr and 2 FBI agents who had driven up from the Missoula field office. They had brought their own threat assessment specialists, and everyone was reviewing Janet's report. Sheriff Carr, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a skeptical expression, spoke first. Ms. Pierce, your report is very thorough, but I have to ask, do you have any direct evidence that Marcus Dalton is planning an attack? Have you heard him make threats? Have you seen weapons or explicit plans? No, Janet admitted. Everything I have is behavioral analysis and circumstantial evidence. But I've done this kind of assessment for 15 years. I know the patterns. Marcus's behavior matches the profile of someone planning an act of public violence. One of the FBI agents, a woman named Sarah Martinez, leaned forward. I reviewed your service record, Ms. Pierce. Your work with the BAU was exemplary. Your assessments were accurate in 93% of cases. That's an exceptional rate. But Sheriff Carr is right. We need more than behavioral observations to take action. Did you attempt to engage Marcus in conversation about his intentions? Not directly, Janet said. I didn't want to alert him that I was suspicious. If he knows he's being watched, he might accelerate his timeline or change his target. The second FBI agent, a man named Robert Lee, spoke up. What exactly do you think Marcus is planning to do? What's his method? Janet took a deep breath. Based on the materials he purchased and his skill level with woodworking and basic construction, I believe he's building a vehicle-based attack device. He could pack his car with materials, park it near the market, and use a timer to trigger an incident. Or he might personally deliver a package to the market area. The materials he bought, timers, batteries, brackets, could be used to construct a timing mechanism. Sheriff Carr frowned. That's a pretty big assumption. Those materials could be used for dozens of innocent purposes. I know, Janet said. That's why I'm here talking to you instead of making accusations publicly. But my professional judgment is that the threat is real and imminent. The market opens in less than 24 hours. I'm asking you to take preventive action. Sarah Martinez and Robert Lee exchanged glances. They had a silent conversation through expressions and slight nods. Finally, Sarah spoke. Ms. Pierce, we take your concerns seriously. Given your background and the thoroughness of your analysis, we're going to take precautionary measures. We'll increase police presence at the market tomorrow. We'll have officers conduct surveillance on Marcus Dalton's residence and vehicle. If he makes any moves toward the market or shows any suspicious activity, we'll intervene. We'll also review his recent communications and purchases more thoroughly. But, Robert added, we're not evacuating the market or arresting Marcus based solely on suspicion. We don't have probable cause. However, we'll be ready to act if your assessment proves correct. Sheriff Carr nodded in agreement. I'll have my deputies positioned around the town square starting at 7 a.m. We'll have plainclothes officers in the crowd. We'll monitor every vehicle that parks within 2 blocks of the market. If Marcus Dalton shows up, we'll watch him closely. Janet felt a mix of relief and anxiety. They were taking her seriously. But what if it wasn't enough? What if Marcus slipped through the surveillance? What if he had accomplices she didn't know about? There's one more thing, Janet said. Marcus has been particularly agitated on Fridays. Today is Friday. His class ends today, which means after this afternoon, he'll have complete freedom to move around and finalize his plans. I think tonight is when he'll make his final preparations. If you're going to catch him with evidence, tonight is your best opportunity. Sarah Martinez nodded. We'll maintain surveillance starting this evening. If he goes anywhere suspicious or makes any overt moves, we'll have eyes on him. Part 10. Friday night. That Friday evening, Marcus Dalton attended his final woodworking class. Janet watched him carefully, trying to see if he knew he was under suspicion. But Marcus seemed normal, quiet, focused on his final project, and occasionally checking the clock. When class ended at 5 p.m., Marcus shook Janet's hand. Thank you for teaching me, Ms. Pierce. I learned a lot. I think I have a real chance at getting a construction job now. Janet forced herself to smile. I'm glad I could help, Marcus. Good luck with everything. She watched him walk to his car, an older model sedan. He drove away slowly, following all traffic laws. Janet's heart sank slightly. He wasn't acting like someone about to commit a crime. Maybe she was wrong. Maybe she had let her old paranoia take over. But as night fell, the surveillance teams reported concerning activity. Marcus drove to a storage unit on the outskirts of town. He spent 2 hours inside the unit, bringing in bags from his car and then loading different items back into his vehicle. The surveillance team couldn't see exactly what he was moving due to darkness and distance, but the activity matched the pattern of someone organizing materials for a planned operation. At 11 p.m., Marcus drove to an empty field several miles outside Copper Valley. He parked his car, got out, and appeared to be testing something. The surveillance team, watching from a distance with night vision equipment, reported that Marcus was checking some kind of device. He spent 30 minutes making adjustments, then returned to his car and drove home. Sheriff Carr called Janet at midnight with an update. "Your assessment seems to be correct. Marcus is definitely preparing something. We still can't see exactly what, but his behavior is highly suspicious. We're going to maintain close surveillance through the night. We've also gotten a warrant to search his storage unit once we have enough probable cause to move in." "Has he made any phone calls?" Janet asked. "Yes, several. We're working on getting permission to access his phone records. It takes time, but we're moving as fast as we can." Janet lay in bed that night, unable to sleep. She kept thinking about the families who would attend the farmers' market tomorrow. Derek and his daughter. Elderly couples, children eating strawberries and playing in the sunshine. All of them completely unaware of the danger that might be approaching. She thought about David Brennan again. She had failed to save him, but maybe, just maybe, she could save these people. Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine and clear blue skies. It was a perfect day for the farmers' market. Janet woke at 5 a.m., her stomach churning with anxiety. She made coffee but couldn't drink it. She paced her house, checking her phone every few minutes for updates. At 6:30 a.m., Sheriff Carr called her. Marcus left his apartment at 6. He's driving toward downtown. His car appears to be loaded with something. It's sitting lower than usual, suggesting heavy cargo. We're following at a distance. We're about to execute a traffic stop. I wanted you to know. Be careful, Janet said. If he has something dangerous in the car, he might panic. We're aware. I have FBI agents, bomb disposal units, and tactical teams on standby. We're treating this as a potential terrorist threat. Stay by your phone. The next hour was the longest of Janet's life. She sat in her living room, staring at her phone, waiting for news. She imagined all the worst-case scenarios. What if Marcus had already triggered something? What if there were multiple devices? What if she had missed something crucial in her analysis? At 7:45 a.m., her phone rang. It was Sarah Martinez from the FBI. "Ms. Pierce, we have Marcus Dalton in custody. Your assessment was accurate. We found materials in his vehicle that were being configured for a time disruption device. He was planning to leave packages in multiple locations around the market area. The bomb disposal unit has secured all materials. No one was hurt, and the market area is safe." Janet felt her legs go weak. She sat down heavily on her couch. Thank God. What was his motive? Why was he planning this? "We're interrogating him now," Sarah said. "Initial indications are that he harbored resentment toward society in general and Copper Valley specifically. He felt the town represented everything he could never have: peace, community, normalcy. He wanted to destroy that. He had been planning this for months, even before he was released from prison." "How did he get the materials while he was incarcerated?" Janet asked. "He had contacts on the outside. We're tracking them down now. But, Ms. Pierce, I want you to know, you saved hundreds of lives today. If you hadn't noticed the warning signs and reported them, Marcus would have succeeded. The devices were sophisticated enough to have caused significant harm and chaos. Your professional instincts were absolutely correct." Janet closed her eyes. "I'm just glad no one was hurt. The sheriff wants to hold a press conference this afternoon. He'd like you to be there. The town deserves to know who kept them safe." Janet's first instinct was to refuse. She didn't want publicity. She didn't want to be a hero. She wanted to return to her quiet life. But then she realized that was no longer possible. The moment she had decided to use her FBI skills again, she had opened a door to her past. There was no closing it now. "Okay," she said quietly. "I'll be there." The press conference was held at 3 p.m. in the Copper Valley Community Center. The room was packed with residents, news reporters from larger Montana cities, and curious onlookers. Sheriff Carr stood at a podium, with FBI agents Sarah Martinez and Robert Lee flanking him. Janet sat to the side, uncomfortable with the attention. Sheriff Carr began by explaining the events of the past 24 hours. He described the threat, the surveillance operation, and the arrest of Marcus Dalton. He emphasized that no one had been hurt and that the Saturday farmers market had proceeded safely, though with heavy police presence. "But," the sheriff said, "I want to be clear about why we were able to prevent this attack. It wasn't luck, it wasn't random. It was because of one person's vigilance, expertise, and courage. Janet Pierce, who many of you know as our community woodworking teacher, is the person who identified this threat and brought it to our attention." A murmur went through the crowd. People turned to look at Janet, confused. Betty Wilson, sitting in the front row, looked shocked. Sheriff Carr continued, "What many of you don't know is that Ms. Pierce has a remarkable professional background. Before coming to Copper Valley 25 years ago, she spent 15 years as a criminal psychologist with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit. She specialized in exactly this kind of threat assessment. She recognized warning signs in Marcus Dalton's behavior that no one else would have caught. She documented her observations professionally. She brought her concerns to us with a detailed report. And because of her expertise and dedication, hundreds of people are safe today." The room erupted in applause. Janet felt her face flush. She didn't want this recognition. She didn't want to be seen as a hero. She was just glad that she had prevented a tragedy. Sheriff Carr invited Janet to say a few words. Reluctantly, she stood and approached the podium. She looked out at the faces of people she had known for 25 years, her friends, neighbors, students, and community members. "I don't know what to say," Janet began quietly. "I came to Copper Valley 25 years ago because I was running from my past. I had experienced a trauma in my work with the FBI, and I couldn't continue in that career. I wanted to start over, to do something simple and peaceful. Teaching woodworking gave me that. You all gave me that. This community accepted me without asking questions about my past, and for that, I'm grateful." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "When I noticed concerning behavior in one of my students, I struggled with what to do. I didn't want to return to my old role as an analyst. I didn't want to be suspicious or paranoid, but I couldn't ignore what my training told me. I couldn't let innocent people be hurt if there was something I could do to prevent it." Janet looked directly at Betty, Margaret, Tom, and other friends in the audience. "I'm sorry I wasn't honest with you about my background. I hope you can understand why. But I want you to know that the person you've known for 25 years is the real me. I'm not some heroic FBI agent. I'm just a woodworking teacher who cares about this community and the people in it." More applause filled the room. People stood up. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Janet felt overwhelmed. After the press conference, dozens of people approached Janet to thank her, hug her, and congratulate her. Betty grabbed her in a tight embrace. "You never said a word all these years, and you were FBI." "I'm sorry," Janet said. "I just wanted to be normal." "Honey," Betty said with a laugh, "you saved our town. That's not normal. That's extraordinary." In the weeks following Marcus Dalton's arrest, life in Copper Valley slowly returned to normal. The Saturday farmers market continued as always, though with somewhat increased security. News media from across the country covered the story of the retired FBI agent who had prevented a tragedy in a small Montana town. Janet gave a few more interviews. always emphasizing that she was just a teacher who happened to notice something concerning. She downplayed her FBI background and redirected attention to the excellent work of local law enforcement and the FBI agents who had responded to her report. But things had changed irrevocably. People in Copper Valley now knew about her past. They treated her with a new respect, almost reverence, that made her uncomfortable. Some saw her as a hero. Others were simply amazed that the quiet woodworking teacher had such an extraordinary background. Janet's students at the detention center were particularly affected. They realized that they had been learning from someone who could truly understand where they came from and what they were going through. Someone who had spent years analyzing criminal behavior, but had chosen to help them rebuild their lives instead of judging them. One of her students, Derek, the one who had mentioned taking his daughter to the market, came to Janet with tears in his eyes. "You saved my little girl," he said. "She would have been at the market that day. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Janet replied gently. "Just keep being a good father. That's all I want." Martin Hayes offered Janet a promotion, a position as the detention center's director of rehabilitation programs. It would have been a significant pay increase and more influence over the facility's programs. But Janet declined. "I appreciate the offer," she told Martin, "but I'm happy teaching woodworking. That's what I came here to do, and that's what I want to continue doing." The FBI also reached out to her. Sarah Martinez called to ask if Janet would consider returning to the Bureau in a consulting capacity. They needed experienced behavioral analysts, and Janet's skills were clearly still sharp. "No, thank you," Janet said firmly. "I left that life for good reasons. I'm glad I was able to help this one time, but I don't want to return to that world." "I understand," Sarah said, "but if you ever change your mind, the door is open." About a month after Marcus's arrest, Janet received an unexpected visitor at her home. It was Robert Chen, her former supervisor from the FBI. He was now in his 70s, retired and living in Seattle. He had driven to Copper Valley specifically to see her. "Janet," he said when she opened the door, "it's good to see you." She invited him in, surprised and a bit emotional. They hadn't spoken in 25 years. Robert looked older, his hair completely white now, but his eyes still held the same kindness she remembered. They sat in Janet's living room, drinking tea and catching up. Robert told her about his retirement, his grandchildren, and his life in Seattle. Janet told him about her 25 years in Copper Valley, her teaching, and her recent experience with Marcus. "I read about what you did," Robert said. "I wasn't surprised. You were always one of the best analysts I ever worked with. But I was surprised that you used your skills again. You were so adamant about leaving that world behind." Janet nodded. "I was. And honestly, Robert, I struggled with it. Part of me wanted to ignore my suspicions and just stay in my safe, quiet life. But I couldn't. Not when lives were at stake." Robert smiled. "That's the Janet I remember. You always put others first. But I came here to tell you something I should have told you 25 years ago. What happened with David Brennan wasn't your fault." Janet felt tears spring to her eyes. "You told me that at the time. I didn't believe you." "I know, but I need you to hear it again. You conducted that interrogation perfectly. There was nothing you could have done differently. David Brennan made his own choice, a tragic choice. You couldn't have prevented it. He hid that blade through multiple security checks. He was determined. You were just trying to help him, and he knew that. His death wasn't a failure on your part." "But I relive it every day," Janet whispered. "I still have nightmares." "I know," Robert said gently. "Trauma doesn't just disappear. But Janet, look at what you've done with your life since then. You've helped hundreds of people through your teaching. You've built a good life here. and you just saved an entire community from tragedy. You've done more good in these 25 years than most people do in a lifetime. That's not the legacy of a failure. That's the legacy of someone who turned pain into purpose. Janet wiped her eyes. Thank you for saying that. I'm proud of you, Robert said. I always was, and I hope you can be proud of yourself too. After Robert left, Janet sat alone in her living room for a long time. She thought about David Brennan, about Marcus Dalton, about all the students she had taught over the years, and about the life she had built in Copper Valley. She realized that Robert was right. She had turned her pain into purpose. She had taken the trauma that nearly destroyed her and used it to help others. She had created a new life that was meaningful and good. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to forgive herself. Life in Copper Valley gradually settled back into its normal rhythm. The intense media attention faded. People stopped constantly bringing up Janet's heroic actions. She was able to return to her quiet routines, teaching her classes, having breakfast at Betty's diner, attending church on Sundays, and tending to her small garden. But some things had changed permanently. Janet found that she was no longer haunted by nightmares of David Brennan every night. The images still came sometimes, but less frequently. She had confronted her past by using her skills again, and in doing so, she had achieved a kind of closure. She also found herself more open with people about her feelings and experiences. She had spent 25 years being private and guarded. Now, she allowed her friends to know her more deeply. She told Betty about the trauma that had brought her to Copper Valley. She talked with Margaret about her years at the FBI. She opened up to Tom about her ongoing healing process. It feels good to not carry secrets anymore, she told Betty one morning over breakfast. I spent so long hiding my past, thinking it defined me in negative ways. But now I can see that my past, good and bad, made me who I am today. You're a survivor, Betty said warmly. And not just a survivor, someone who helps other survivors. That's special. Janet's work at the detention center took on new meaning. Her students now knew about her FBI background, which initially made some of them nervous. But Janet addressed this directly in her classes. Yes, I used to analyze criminal behavior for the FBI, she told a new group of students. But I'm not here to judge you or analyze you. I'm here to teach you woodworking and to support your transition back into society. Your past doesn't define your future unless you let it. I'm proof of that. This honesty created deeper trust between Janet and her students. They felt comfortable asking her questions about criminal psychology, about her experiences, and about how she dealt with her own trauma. Janet found these conversations meaningful. She was able to use her knowledge not to profile criminals, but to help people understand themselves and make better choices. The detention center reported that Janet's students continued to have lower recidivism rates than other programs. Martin Hayes attributed this to her unique combination of practical skills teaching and psychological insight. You help them with their hands and their minds, he told her. That's powerful. 6 months after his arrest, Marcus Dalton went to trial. He was charged with multiple federal offenses related to planning a terrorist attack. Janet was called to testify as a witness. Sitting in the courtroom, facing Marcus across the room, was difficult. Janet had to describe how she had observed him, analyzed his behavior, and concluded he was planning an attack. Defense attorneys tried to portray her as paranoid, overly suspicious, and biased against their client. But the evidence was overwhelming. The materials found in Marcus's car, his communications with accomplices, and his own partial confession all confirmed the planned attack. During Janet's testimony, Marcus stared at her with cold hatred. When the prosecutor asked if she had been certain of his intentions, Janet responded carefully. Based on my training and experience, I recognized behavioral patterns consistent with pre-attack planning. I couldn't be 100% certain without direct evidence, which is why I reported my concerns to authorities rather than taking action myself. But yes, I believed Mr. Dalton was planning to harm people, and I couldn't let that happen. The prosecutor then asked, "Ms. Pierce, what motivated you to take action after being retired from this kind of work for 25 years?" Janet thought carefully before answering. "I came to Copper Valley to escape my past in law enforcement. I had experienced a trauma that made me want to leave that world behind. But when I recognized that people might be in danger, I realized I couldn't hide from my skills and experience. Sometimes we're called to use our gifts even when it's uncomfortable or painful. I couldn't live with myself if I had ignored the warning signs and people had been hurt." The defense attorney cross-examined her aggressively. "Ms. Pierce, isn't it true that you left the FBI because of poor judgment that led to a suspect's death?" Janet felt the old pain flare up, but she kept her composure. "I left the FBI because I witnessed a suspect take his own life, and it caused me significant trauma. The investigation cleared me of any wrongdoing. But yes, I struggled with that experience emotionally. However, my professional record speaks for itself. I had a 93% accuracy rate in threat assessments during my career." "So you profile people based on their behavior?" the defense attorney pressed. "You make assumptions about their intentions without direct evidence?" "I assess patterns," Janet corrected. "Behavioral analysis is a recognized field of forensic psychology. It's not about assumptions. It's about recognizing indicators based on extensive research and experience. In this case, my assessment was confirmed by the physical evidence found in Mr. Dalton's possession." The trial lasted 2 weeks. The jury deliberated for only 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. Marcus Dalton was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. As Janet left the courthouse, she felt a complex mix of emotions. She was relieved that justice had been served and that Copper Valley was safe. But she also felt sadness for Marcus, a man whose untreated mental health issues and antisocial tendencies had led him down a destructive path. That evening, she talked with Martin Hayes about the trial. "I keep thinking about how this could have been prevented," she said. "If Marcus had received proper mental health treatment during his first incarceration, maybe he wouldn't have planned this attack. We need to do better at rehabilitation." "You're right," Martin agreed. "And that's one reason your work here is so important. You're helping people change their lives before they reach that point of no return." Inspired by her experience with Marcus, Janet decided to develop a new program at the detention center. With Martin's support, she created a specialized workshop that combined woodworking instruction with basic counseling and life skills training. The program, called Building Futures, was designed for inmates who had struggled with anger management, impulse control, or antisocial behaviors. Janet worked with the center's mental health staff to develop a curriculum that addressed both practical skills and emotional regulation. "Woodworking is actually therapeutic," Janet explained to her first group of students in the new program. "When you work with wood, you have to be patient. You have to control your emotions. If you get angry or rushed, you'll make mistakes. The wood teaches you to breathe, focus, and work carefully. These are the same skills you need to build a better life." She incorporated mindfulness exercises into her teaching. Before starting work each day, she led students through brief meditation and breathing exercises. She taught them to recognize when they were becoming frustrated and how to step back and calm themselves. "This saw doesn't care about your anger," she would tell them. "This wood doesn't care about your past. They only respond to what you do right now, in this moment. You have to be present. You have to be intentional." That's true for woodworking, and it's true for life. The program was successful beyond expectations. Students in Building Futures showed measurable improvements in emotional regulation, conflict resolution, and future planning. Many of them said that Janet's unique combination of practical teaching and psychological insight had genuinely changed their perspectives. One student, a young man named Tyler, who had struggled with violent outbursts, told her, "You taught me that I can control my hands, and if I can control my hands, I can control my actions." That sounds simple, but no one ever explained it to me that way before. A year after preventing the attack on the farmers' market, the town of Copper Valley decided to honor Janet officially. They organized a special ceremony at the community center. The mayor presented her with a key to the city and declared April 15th Janet Pierce Day in recognition of her service to the community. Janet tried to decline the honor, but Betty convinced her to accept it. "People need to celebrate goodness," Betty said. "Let them thank you. Let them recognize what you did. It's good for the community." At the ceremony, various people spoke about Janet's impact. Martin Hayes talked about her work at the detention center. Sheriff Carr described her professional expertise and courage. Derek, the student whose daughter had been saved, gave an emotional speech about second chances and heroism. But the most touching moment came when one of Janet's former students, a man named James who had completed her program 5 years earlier, approached the podium. "I want to tell you about Ms. Pierce," James began. 10 years ago, I was released from prison after serving time for robbery. I was angry at the world. I felt like society owed me something. I took Ms. Pierce's woodworking class because I had to, not because I wanted to." He paused, emotional. "But Ms. Pierce didn't treat me like a criminal. She treated me like a person who was capable of building something good. She taught me woodworking, but she also taught me patience, discipline, and self-respect. She asked about my life, my hopes, my fears. She believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Today, I own a small carpentry business. I'm married, I have 2 kids, I'm a productive member of society. And it's because of Ms. Pierce. She gives people like me a second chance. She saves lives not just by preventing attacks, but by helping broken people become whole again." By the end of James's speech, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Janet stood up and hugged him, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. As Janet approached her 67th birthday, she found herself reflecting on the strange journey her life had taken. From a driven FBI agent, to a traumatized woman running from her past, to a quiet teacher in a small town, to an unexpected hero, her path had been unpredictable. She realized that she had tried to run from her identity as a psychologist, but that identity was intrinsically part of who she was. She couldn't separate her analytical mind from her caring heart. The key was learning to use her gifts in ways that healed rather than harmed. She also recognized that trauma didn't just disappear. Even now, years after David Brennan's death, she still felt the pain of that moment. But she had learned to live with the trauma, to honor it as part of her story without letting it control her. One Sunday after church, she had a conversation with Pastor Helen, the elderly minister of the Episcopal Church Janet attended. They sat in the church garden, enjoying the spring sunshine. "I've been thinking about redemption," Janet said. "For so long, I felt like I needed to redeem myself for David's death, for my failure as I saw it. But I'm starting to understand that redemption isn't about erasing the past. It's about what we do moving forward." Pastor Helen nodded wisely. "That's a profound insight. We can't change what happened yesterday, but we can choose how we live today. You've chosen to use your gifts to help others. That's not redemption through suffering. That's redemption through service." "I think I finally understand what it means to forgive myself," Janet said. "Not to forget what happened or to excuse it, but to accept it as part of my story and still believe I'm worthy of living a good life. And you are worthy, Pastor Helen said firmly. You've always been worthy. It just took you some time to see it. Janet's story began to inspire others beyond Copper Valley. She received invitations to speak at conferences about rehabilitation, trauma recovery, and second chances. At first, she declined these invitations, but eventually she accepted a few speaking engagements, realizing that her story might help others. She spoke at universities training forensic psychologists, sharing her experiences and emphasizing the importance of self-care in high-stress professions. Don't sacrifice your mental health for your career, she told young psychology students. When trauma occurs, address it immediately. Don't wait 25 years like I did. She also spoke at corrections facilities and rehabilitation programs, encouraging staff to see inmates as people capable of change. Every person has a story, she said. Every person has potential for growth. Our job isn't to judge their past, but to support their future. Several young professionals reached out to Janet for mentorship. One woman, a criminal psychologist named Dr. Rachel Morrison, told Janet that she had been considering leaving the field due to burnout, but was inspired by Janet's story to find new ways to use her skills. You showed me that there's more than one way to make a difference, Rachel said. I don't have to work for the FBI or in law enforcement to use my psychology training. I can work in rehabilitation, education, or community programs. You've given me a new vision for my career. Janet was touched by these conversations. She realized that her story had come full circle. She had started as a young idealist, wanting to make a difference by catching criminals. She had been broken by trauma. She had rebuilt herself through teaching. And now, she was making a difference again by inspiring others to find their own paths. At 67, Janet showed no signs of slowing down. She continued teaching at the detention center, though she reduced her hours slightly to allow time for her speaking engagements and mentorship activities. The Building Futures program had expanded, and other detention centers in Montana were implementing similar programs based on Janet's model. She also began writing. A publisher had approached her about writing a memoir, but Janet declined. Instead, she wrote a practical handbook for rehabilitation instructors called Teaching with Purpose, combining skills training with psychological support. The book became popular in corrections and education circles. In her personal life, Janet deepened her friendships in Copper Valley. She and Betty started a weekly dinner tradition. She joined Margaret's book club at the library. She volunteered at the church, helping with community outreach programs. She adopted a dog, a gentle golden retriever she named Henry, who became her constant companion. Her house, once a quiet refuge where she hid from the world, became a gathering place for friends, students, and community members. People would stop by for coffee, advice, or just to chat. Janet's living room saw long conversations about life, second chances, and the power of community. One evening, Tom from the hardware store stopped by to fix a leaky faucet. As he worked, he said, "You know, Janet, you've changed this town, not just by preventing that attack, but by being who you are. You've shown us that everyone has hidden depths, that we shouldn't judge people by appearances, and that it's never too late to make a difference." "I think the town changed me more than I changed it," Janet replied. "Copper Valley gave me a place to heal, to grow, and to discover who I really am. I'll always be grateful for that." As another year passed and Janet approached 68, she received news that Marcus Dalton wanted to speak with her. He had written her a letter from federal prison requesting a meeting. Janet's first instinct was to refuse. She had no desire to face Marcus again or to hear whatever he might want to say. But after discussing it with Pastor Helen and Betty, she decided to accept the meeting. She felt it might provide closure for both of them. The meeting took place at the federal prison where Marcus was serving his sentence. Janet sat across from him in a small visiting room, separated by a table but not by glass. Marcus looked older, thinner, and more defeated than she remembered. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said quietly. "I didn't think you would. I didn't—" "What did you want to tell me?" Janet asked directly. Marcus took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize and to thank you." Janet was surprised. "Thank me?" "You saved me from myself," Marcus said. "If you hadn't stopped me, I would have done something terrible. I would have hurt innocent people, including children. I would have destroyed my soul completely. I'm in prison now, but I'm alive. And I've been getting mental health treatment. Real treatment for the first time in my life." He looked down at his hands. "I've been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder and depression. I've started medication and therapy. I'm learning why I thought the way I did, why I wanted to hurt people. It doesn't excuse what I almost did, but it helps me understand." Janet listened carefully, her professional training kicking in. She could see that Marcus was being genuine. The cold hatred she had seen in him before was gone, replaced by something more human: regret, awareness, and fragile hope. "I'm glad you're getting help," Janet said. "That's important work you're doing." "Ms. Pierce," Marcus continued, "you tried to teach me more than woodworking. I see that now. You tried to teach me patience, discipline, self-control. But I wasn't ready to learn. I was too angry, too hurt, too broken. I wish I had listened." "It's not too late to learn those lessons," Janet said gently. "You have many years ahead of you. What you do with those years is up to you. You can waste them in bitterness, or you can use them to grow, to heal, and maybe someday to help others avoid the mistakes you made." Marcus nodded. "That's what I want to do. My therapist says I need to take responsibility for my actions while also working on my mental health. It's hard, but I'm trying." Before she left, Marcus asked one more question. "Why did you care enough to stop me? You could have just stayed quiet, stayed safe. Why did you risk your peaceful life to save people you barely knew?" Janet thought about this carefully before answering. "Because I've been where you were. Not planning violence, but in a dark place where I felt broken and hopeless. Someone helped me when I needed it. The people of Copper Valley helped me. I couldn't stand by and let you hurt them. And honestly, I couldn't let you destroy yourself either. Everyone deserves a chance at redemption, including you." As Janet drove back to Copper Valley that evening, she felt a sense of peace. The conversation with Marcus had been difficult, but it reinforced something she had learned over the years. Hurt people, but healing people help people. Marcus's violence had come from untreated pain and mental illness. By getting him help, even involuntarily through incarceration, she had potentially started him on a path toward healing. As the second anniversary of the prevented attack approached, Copper Valley organized another farmers market, this one specifically designed to celebrate community resilience and second chances. The market featured booths from local rehabilitation programs, including displays of furniture and crafts made by Janet's students. Janet walked through the market with Henry on a leash, stopping to admire the various displays. She saw Derek with his daughter, now 9 years old, and happily eating a strawberry ice cream cone. She saw James, her former student, selling beautiful handmade furniture from his carpentry business. She saw dozens of community members who had become friends over the years. Betty found her near the bakery booth. "Look at this," Betty said, gesturing at the crowded, happy market. "All these people, these families, these children, they're all here because of you. You didn't just stop one attack. You preserved an entire community's sense of safety and trust. We preserved it together. Janet corrected. Law enforcement, community members, everyone working together. I just noticed something concerning and reported it. Other people did the hard work of responding and taking action. Ever humble, Betty said with a smile. That's our Janet. As Janet watched children playing in the sunshine, she thought about the different paths her life could have taken. She could have stayed broken after David Brennan's suicide. She could have ignored her concerns about Marcus Dalton. She could have kept running from her past indefinitely. But instead, she had chosen to heal, to serve, and to use her gifts even when it was painful. And in doing so, she had found not just purpose, but peace. Several more years passed. Janet continued teaching at the detention center well into her 70s, finally retiring at age 74. By then, she had taught over 600 students. Her Building Futures program had been implemented in 32 correctional facilities across 6 states. Countless lives had been changed by her patient, compassionate approach to rehabilitation. When she retired, the detention center threw her a party that was attended by dozens of former students. Many brought their families, spouses, children, even grandchildren. They shared stories of how Janet had impacted their lives, how she had helped them find their way, how she had believed in them when no one else did. You taught us that our past doesn't have to determine our future, one former student said. You showed us that change is possible if we're willing to work for it. Janet spent her retirement years continuing to volunteer at the church, mentoring young psychologists, and writing articles about rehabilitation and trauma recovery. She also traveled, visiting places she had never had time to see during her busy FBI years or her focused teaching years. But she always returned to Copper Valley. It was home. The small Montana town that had given her refuge 40 years earlier was where she belonged. On the 40th anniversary of her arrival in Copper Valley, the town planted a tree in the Central Park with a plaque that read, "In honor of Janet Pierce, who taught us that everyone deserves a second chance, including ourselves." Janet stood at the tree planting ceremony, now 81 years old, surrounded by friends, former students, and community members spanning multiple generations. As she looked at the young oak tree, small now, but with the potential to grow strong and tall, she thought about her own journey. She had arrived in Copper Valley as a broken woman trying to escape her past. She had built a new life through teaching and service. She had reluctantly used her old skills one more time when it mattered most. And in doing all of this, she had discovered that redemption wasn't about forgetting the past or pretending trauma never happened. Redemption was about taking our broken pieces and building something beautiful with them. It was about using our pain to help others heal. It was about second chances, not just for others, but for ourselves. As the ceremony ended and people gathered for a community picnic, Janet felt Henry nudge her hand with his nose. She smiled and scratched his ears. Life was good. Not perfect, but good. And that was enough. Looking around at the faces of people whose lives she had touched and who had touched her life in return, Janet realized something profound. She had spent 15 years studying the worst of human nature in criminals, and 25 years witnessing the best of human nature in people trying to change. Both experiences had taught her the same essential truth. We are all capable of both darkness and light. The choice of which path we follow is up to us. And sometimes all it takes to help someone choose the light is one person who believes in them, who sees their potential, who offers them a second chance. Janet Pierce had been given that second chance by Copper Valley. And in return, she had spent her life offering second chances to others. It was a legacy of hope, compassion, and redemption that would continue long after she was gone. As the sun set over the mountains surrounding Copper Valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Janet sat on a park bench with Henry at her feet and Betty by her side. They watched children play, families laugh, and community members enjoy another peaceful Saturday evening. "You did good, Janet," Betty said softly. "Real good." Janet smiled. "We all did. Together." And in that moment, in that small Montana town, with friends beside her and peace in her heart, Janet Pierce knew that she had finally come home, not just to a place, but to herself. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. We'd love to hear what inspired you the most. And where in the world are you watching from? Let us know below.